Welcome to From the Honeycomb podcast. I am your host, Katerina. Join me as we explore stories of fearless female entrepreneurs and inspiring women in architecture, construction, engineering, and beyond. Each episode is a captivating blend of topics that resonate with the soul. Whether you're here to learn more about entrepreneurship, architecture, holistic living, or just need a little extra inspiration, you've come to the right place. So sit back, relax, and let the buzz of positive energy spark your curiosity. Today, I'm joined by Kelsey Omada, architect and owner of her own firm, Portico. Kelsey has extensive experience working with a diverse range of clients, from national grocery retailers and developers to a large retail and restaurant chains, as well as small business owners. Her firm is dedicated to ensuring that every project is driven by purpose, excellence, and a commitment to enhancing both the built environment and the communities they serve. Kelsey, welcome to From the Honeycomb.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, happy to have you here. As you know, we begin every episode by sharing something that you're grateful for in the present moment. So what are you grateful for?
I'm so grateful for so many things in this phase of my life right now, but really the biggest thing has been the support of my husband. So he's 100% backing everything that I'm doing, and he's so excited for this venture. He works a very intense, more than full-time job, and so I get to do this basically with no fear, or a lot less fear, because I have a really nice safety net, which I think is one thing that a lot of people don't get to have. So very fortunate.
I really resonate with that as well. My husband also, too, is that safety net, and there's definitely no way without him I would have been able to also start my own firm.
Exactly. You know, I'm not worried about putting food on the table, so
Yeah.
it's a good place to be.
It is. It's definitely, it reduces one of the stressors that you may have. Of all the stressors of having your own company, it's nice to have that taken care of.
Definitely.
Hi, it's me, Katerina. Before we jump into today's episode, I want to share with you something that can change the trajectory of your life. If you are ready to start your own architecture firm but are feeling overwhelmed by where to begin, I understand, because I felt the same way when I first embarked on my entrepreneurial journey. This is why I have created the ebook, The Mindful Blueprint for Launching Your Architecture Firm. This comprehensive workbook contains everything I wish I had known before starting my own firm. From building a solid business plan to creating your brand, The Mindful Blueprint for Launching Your Architecture Firm offers a step-by-step guide tailored to your timeline, whether you're launching your firm today, next month, or in a few years. Dive into essential topics like financial planning, organization strategies, and how to secure your first client, all in one convenient resource. That's right, you don't have to spend hours researching. I have done that for you so you can focus on building your business. And that's not all. With your purchase, you'll also receive an exclusive meditation for business owners, mindfulness tips, a crystal guide for support, and gratitude exercises to help you stay focused and positive throughout your journey. Turn your dream of having your own firm into a reality with the Mindful Blueprint for Launching Your Architecture Firm. Click on the link in the show notes to get your copy today. Now, let's dive into the episode. Well, Kelsey, share with me and the listeners your story about how you got into architecture. Like, what made you decide to become an architect?
Sure. So growing up, I didn't know any architects. No one in my family was an architect. I didn't have any intro drafting classes, but I was, like a lot of us, I really loved to sketch and draw and was really interested in art. But then there was this other side of my brain that was, into physics and math and more technical and rigid. And, I don't know what kind of led me to that, but I knew that architecture was supposed to be the culmination of those two things together. So that's what I decided to pursue. And I went to the University of Arizona in Tucson, so a couple hours from where I'm at, where I grew up in Phoenix. And they have a BArch program there, so I did their Bachelor's of Architecture. And after graduation, moved back to Phoenix for jobs. At this time, it was 2014. It was we're post-recession, but a lot of firms didn't want new grads or interns. And so that was a big struggle. And so I was fortunate to get hired by a medium-sized firm who was based in the Midwest, but they had a regional office in Phoenix. And, I had applied to 20 plus different firms. So I was so fortunate just to have a job, and I was excited to have a paycheck and have a normal life outside of architecture school.
Yep.
And I didn't really know what industry I was interested in. I was just really focused on getting a job.
Mhm.
So I did get really lucky and really enjoyed the firm that hired me. I started right away in grocery retail, commercial work, commercial development work, and really enjoyed it. So I liked what I did there. Was really fortunate to get a lot of good experience early on that I didn't really know maybe some of my colleagues weren't getting at the time, like
Mhm.
project management really early on, contracts, fee negotiation, client acquisition. And so I had a little bit of that sort of fed to me while I was there. I was also fortunate because that firm was a big push into licensure. So at the time, there were still two camps, and I'm sure there's still two camps to this day where some people say get licensed right out of school because then you have those skills and traits from studying that will help you with the tests. And then there was the other camp that said, no, 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 give yourself a couple years in practice and it'll help you with contracts or with building systems or things like that. So I kind of didn't have a choice on which camp to pick because this firm was such a big supporter of new grads getting licensed. So all of my colleagues were doing the same. They provided study materials, study groups. So it was
Wow.
kind of a no brainer to get started. So within about 8 months out of school, I took my first test. And this was all 4.0, so it was 7 exams. And it took me about 3 years from that day pretty much to finish exams. And another funny thing about licensure at that time too was the AIAS president had a campaign to do 7 exams in 7 days, obviously as an
Wow.
incentive to, get students or new grads into testing and remove a little bit of the fear from
Mhm.
it. But I felt at that time that that was just a total morale killer. I am the absolute queen of failing Aries.
Oh,
I
same, fellow queen with you. So,
Yeah, I took 15.
okay.
So I gave NCARB a lot of money. And
Yep.
so I took way more than I needed to, failed a lot, failed
Mhm.
some exams a couple times. So it was really rough because I'm trying to learn just technical skills in general on like
Mhm.
how an architecture firm works,
Mhm.
plus passing and usually failing AREs. But then obviously like the best satisfaction was passing that last exam. And I love to talk about that mostly because I'm trying to normalize it a little bit because at that
Mhm.
time it was, you fail one and that was the usual. But that
Mhm.
wasn't the case clearly at all.
Yeah.
Lots of us were failing exams. So just after I got licensed, I switched firms. It was an international firm with an office in Phoenix, again with a focus in retail and restaurant and hospitality. So that was really interesting to me. I got to still work with a lot of national accounts in addition to, some really great restaurant owners and entrepreneurs. And while I was at that firm, I started as an architect and then moved my way into the role as director of architecture. So while I was in that role, very similar to my first firm, I had a lot of involvement in contracts, fee negotiation, client acquisition, all the same things, but also in standards and policies.
Mhm.
So there was always, this thought in the back of my mind of, how would I do it differently if I had my own
Mhm.
firm? But it was never always the plan. And so, the stars kind of aligned and certain things happened and I decided to start my own firm. So happy to have that experience and of all the things that I learned at the firms I was at. And that kind of all led me here.
Wow. Okay. So our paths are very similar. I graduated in 2015. So I just hearing from architecture
Yep.
school, which I want to back up to that. Was yours a 4-year program, 5-year program?
5-year program.
5-year program. So regular. Okay. So both 5-year programs, the architecture exams. Also, I think I took probably around 15. It was
Yeah.
very hard. So I'm just hearing everything. And it's like a little mirror image of everything. Although I think I definitely knew I always wanted to have my own firm because I like being the boss.
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
definitely that mentality. But can you walk us through kind of that moment you decided that you for sure were going to have your own firm? Because there's so much that happens before it,
Mhm.
but then the moment when you're like, okay, now I'm going to do it. What was
Yeah.
that like for you?
So, in all of the firms, I always wanted to understand the path to ownership. So in the same way, I liked the idea of being the boss and, in a leadership role, but I always kind of thought, okay, well, maybe it was the carrot I was chasing at the firm I was at. So I wanted to understand, what did it take for someone to get to that position? Is there a buy-in? How's the company structured? What are the different things? And what's the succession plans? Like, I wanted to know all of that. And then I learned, once I thought that maybe ownership wasn't going to happen at this place, I knew that I was going to have to do it on my own.
Mhm.
So that was kind of the moment where it was like, I realized, you know what? I don't think that's going to be a possibility for me here. And if I want to do this, I need to do it for myself. And that was
Mhm.
really like the light bulb moment. And, within a few months, like, that's how quickly it kind of came to fruition and happened. And, I was always kind of talking to my husband, who's a CPA, about, how would the company be structured,
Yeah.
and what would we do with this, or how do we do this from the financial side? And so there was always that, like, architecture business brain
Mhm.
kind of in discussion. And then, the culmination of me deciding, you know what, I'm going to leave my secure employment and go head first into this.
Good for you. And also, thank you for sharing what your husband does. It always interests me what architects' husbands do. And I
Yeah.
think it's it's always interesting. And it's such a bonus, though, I think, that you have someone with like a financial background who
Yep.
can help understand. Because I don't know what the laws are in Arizona then for starting your own architecture firm, but are you sole proprietor, LLC, corporation?
I'm an LLC.
You're an LLC. So see, in California, we can't be an LLC as an architect.
I see.
So
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
I'm noticing everybody else is an LLC in every other state as an
Yeah.
architect. So I was wondering too how your setup was and like how you knew which way you were going to go, which route as far as building the structure of your firm. So how did you decide to do LLC versus corporation or sole proprietor?
I'll tell you, it was 100% at the advice of my CPA, my live-in CPA.
Nice.
I had an idea, right? I worked at firms that were LLCs or corporations, and obviously the tax implications, but also the legal obligations
Mhm.
associated with what you can call yourself in the practice of architecture too. And so it was, the tax implications plus, the advice of my lawyer as well too. So
Mm.
I leaned heavily on those people to sort of guide me. I think the other way a lot of people would do it, kind of like what you were saying, is, who are the other small firms or sole proprietors in your state, and how are they structured, and ask the
Mhm.
questions,
Mhm.
how did you get set up? So that was really it.
Wow. And I think you brought up an important point too. If anybody's listening who's thinking about starting their own architecture firm, is like I like to say, it takes a village. You
Hmm.
checked in with an accountant. Thankfully,
Yep.
you have a live-in accountant, which is
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
But you also checked with a lawyer. And I think
Yep.
that's also something important too, because I feel like during the AREs, you learn how much exposure you have to
Yes.
lawsuits in the
Yep.
profession, especially when it's your own firm. So the fact that you took the initial steps to check in with other professionals and get their opinions, I think you perfectly set up the foundation for your business, because that's another thing too is I think some people think they can just jump right into architecture and having a firm, but you have to have a contract, you have insurances. And so the
Yep.
fact that you were able to take a moment, look at what is this even going to be structured like, was very smart and responsible for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I knew, obviously, kind of being involved in that in my other firms, how important that was going to be, especially practicing as an architect versus, if I had wanted to just practice as a designer, it would have been very
Mhm.
different. But obviously, the goal was to practice architecture and to sign my own drawings. You're right, it added a whole other level of liability and the insurances I needed, because that's what I wanted to do. Registrations and,
Mhm.
making sure the board of technical registration has you as an architect, but also your firm is practicing architecture. It's
Yeah.
a whole lots of hoops to jump through.
No, it is. It is. So once you established you wanted to have your own architecture firm, I want to know how you selected your name, like how you were inspired to go. Because, like, for me, I'm just Katerina Brand of Architecture Inc.
Mhm.
That was it. I was like, it's my name,
Yeah,
just plain and
yeah,
simple. But
yeah.
you decided to pick a different name, not just have it be your name. So walk us through the process of picking your name.
Yeah, I knew I didn't want my own name. I think for lots of different reasons, maybe a little bit, to stay a little bit more anonymous, but also maybe as the firm grows, it wasn't maybe just about me. There was other people involved, but also I liked having a name that kind of defined it a little bit differently. So Portico was actually born. Well, I should back up. I did consult with a branding and marketing agency who helped with my name, my logo, my branding, and they did an absolute killer job. And, I was totally impressed with what they did. So I was going through these options with them. And, I really love classical architecture. I love Italian Renaissance architecture.
Mm.
And I was kind of thinking, okay, what could a name be that can be spoken in multiple languages, right? That isn't just purely an English name, or maybe not even a real word at all.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was
Yeah.
also thinking of domains and things like that to
Yep.
stay unique. So we kind of tossed around a couple different names and thinking of all those classical architecture terms. And I thought Portico, okay, well, let's make it Portica. And then, it adds that feminine twist, that female
Mm-hmm.
founder twist. And then it also creates a word that's not a real word
Mm-hmm.
and helps with branding and things like that. So that's how it came to
Wow.
be.
Wow. I love that you did I have an ebook about how to start your own architecture firm, and you are literally going through chapter by chapter of like how you're doing it, which I love. I'm just like, anybody listening, like, this is exactly how you do it. You have to consult first. We talked about the accountants, the lawyers,
Mhm.
but then the branding and the name, and like you're thinking
Mhm.
about domains, and that's another
Mhm.
huge thing. And is the
Mhm.
name available? Obviously, the more
Mhm.
unique it is. You even thought about what if in the future you add a partner or someone, like it grows. Those are these huge decisions you have to make before you even sign up your first project, which I want to get to after that as well. But there is so much background work that goes before you can
Definitely.
officially sign that first client. And I think that's something too, is having that transition point too, which I want to ask you about. How long, if you can share with us, how
Yeah.
long was that transition point of when you started talking to the lawyers and your in-house accountant and all that to when you signed your first project? Like, roughly what was that timeline like?
I would say 3 months, almost exactly. It happened quick. I left my job in December. By the first of the year, I kinda had the holidays, and then by the
Mhm.
first of the year, I kind of had already talked to the branding agency, so that was sort of happening on the side while I was trying to set up the LLC in the first of the year, and having the conversations with lawyers and continuing the branding process. So really, I signed my first contract before I had a name and I had an LLC. I didn't have a
Oh, wow.
logo. So it kind of happened in parallel, and
Oh, wow.
I knew talking to the marketing agency, the branding agency, that let's solidify the name so I can get the
Mhm.
LLC so I can get work.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was like high priority. And then it was okay, then the rest of the branding and the website can follow. So I was also really fortunate that, I was able to reconnect with a lot of people from my network. And it just happened to be, I connected with one of my former colleagues who's an interior designer. And she was like, oh my gosh, you messaged me at the perfect time. I have a client who needs an architect.
Wow.
And so we got to team up on that. And that is my first project. So
Wow. That was going to be one of
yeah,
my questions, is that first project, how do you get it? Because that's the question that everybody asks, is like, well, how do I
yep,
get my first project? And you
yeah,
right there, literally, we're going page by page in my book. You network, it's network. And that's like the biggest
yeah,
thing you need, is having a network and building a network. And then you also reach out to people you previously worked with, which is
yeah.
now how I've even been getting projects. And it's,
Mhm.
you're constantly building relationships, new relationships, old
Yeah.
relationships. You're checking in with everybody. Like, the moment, I remember I read it somewhere from Bryn Young. It was on one of her, it was like when she launched her firm as well. She's like, tell anybody and everybody that you
Mhm.
have a firm. And that
Mhm.
sounds like is exactly what you did. You started reaching
Yep.
out.
Well, that was my biggest thing too, not only just to get work, but to also associate myself with a different company. They
Mm-hmm.
knew me associated with that firm, but I
Mm-hmm.
wanted them to know me associated with Portica. And that takes, I know it takes months, years to kind of make that transition. Just like when you move from job to job, there's a lot of catch up, reaching back out to your network. Hey, here's my new email. Hey, here's my
Yeah.
new contact information. So I knew I had to do that, that wasn't any different from moving from firm to firm.
No, definitely. And that's a nice way to reach out too, is like, hey, I changed my contact information too. That's a nice, polite way to like also kind of
Yeah.
build that. And then, so where are you now in your entrepreneurship journey? How many years have you been in business?
So not even 1 year. We're 8
Okay.
months into this,
Oh, this
and
is this year. Oh my gosh. Oh, this
yeah,
January. Wow. Oh my gosh.
yeah.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you, thank you. And I know that you just hit 1 year, right? Not too
Yes,
long
I
ago,
did.
and so
Yes.
yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I mean, it's gone by there's, like, part of me that thinks, like, "Wow," like, it feels like I was just sitting at my desk in the office, 2 months ago, and then I
Mhm.
look at the calendar, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, no, it's been 8 months, like, this is crazy how time has
Mhm.
flown by." So, yeah, so that all started the beginning of this year, and we're 8 months in.
Wow. So how do you feel now? So how do you feel 8 months in?
I mean, I feel great. I think the biggest things, and I'm sure you relate to, like the reasons you want to start your own firm, a lot of it is independence. A lot of it
Mhm.
is, I want to, I always thought like I wanted to, maybe I would be this kind of client servant if I had my own
Mhm.
practice, or I would have these policies or do this way that you can't always do as an employee. So I always thought about that for sure. So getting able to execute on that, that's amazing first. The other big thing that I noticed is when I worked, as an employee and I was working on, national accounts or projects all across the country, you totally lose touch of your local community and network.
Mhm.
And now that I have my own firm, I am obviously, pushing my national network, but reconnecting with my local community, trying to get back involved in my local AAA chapter, going to local networking events, seeing what's happening, being locally built in Arizona or in Phoenix,
Mhm.
because there's so much happening here. And then, that's a small world on its own. I'll meet so and so, and they happen to know so and so. And so that was the biggest thing that I felt like I had kind of missed out on was not understanding or knowing my local community from that perspective. So that's been the biggest eye opener really in the last 8 months. I've met so many people that were here in my backyard this whole time. So,
Mm. That's something I really resonate with as well. I feel like even though at my previous firm, it was my boss who went out to the networking events. And he also had a really long presence in the city that we worked in. And so people knew him. And now I've been growing networking, joining local business clubs. I joined a realtor club. I'm the only architect out of 100 affiliates. So, like, I'm the only architect at every meeting, which is like amazing. So, I've been getting so many referrals from that as well. And it's like, it's so true. It's building your network that you have, but then also growing because you never know where your next project is going to come from. And that
absolutely.
too it's diversifying the network that you have as well because yeah, like I
Mhm.
said, you never know where that project's going to come from.
Exactly.
And another thing I want to ask you, so you're about 8 months in. What are some of I've started to do this thing for my newsletters, like the pains and gains of business. And so can you share with us some of in the last few months, what have been some of the pains of having your own business? And I also want to get to the gains, but what are some of the
Yeah.
kind of the challenges that maybe surprised you?
Yeah, honestly, the biggest challenge, I mean, lots of things about running the business are
Mhm.
challenging from an admin perspective, but really, I went from working with a big office with a big team to just me.
Yeah.
And so it's a little lonely. And,
Hmm.
I'm working from home. And even through COVID, I hated working from home. I
Really?
love to be in that studio and office environment. I just thrive a little better. It also helps me keep my routine nice and neat, like
Hmm.
work brain in the office and then at home you can turn off, but now as a business owner that never really happens. So
No. No.
yeah, I enjoy more going out to these events, right? Also to kind of get me out from in front of my
Hmm.
computer. That's been the biggest thing is just kind of being on your own.
No, that is so true in a way. And the way I've kind of helped myself, because for me, I'm a homebody. I love working from home. I wish during COVID we weren't able to work from home, but I wish I had because for me, I'm a social butterfly. So I just don't
Yeah.
get work done. So it's
Yeah.
actually good that I'm home alone. But those moments where I do want to be connected with people, exactly how you just said, you go to these networking events. That's
Hmm.
how I fill my social cup.
Hmm.
Also, I like to work at a cafe. I don't talk
Yep.
to anybody, but I have people like their energies
The
around
noise.
me.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
noise, yeah. That in the cafe I go to, there's this really nice long bar, and there's usually other people working. And so, like, I'm
Exactly.
like, okay, we're all just kind of working together, but we don't know each other. So that helps us true. But that is so true that sometimes it can feel lonely. And I think that's, again, that network is really important to have because, yeah, you do have moments because I don't know if you're thinking about hiring or if you're busy enough to hire.
Mhm.
I know that's
Mhm.
something I'm currently reevaluating if it's worth it. But then, I mean, I work from home. Where are they going to work from? So they have to work
Exactly.
from home. So
Yeah.
that's also things to think about as well.
Definitely. For the social component, I would love to hire 30 people right now. from a workload perspective,
Yeah.
that's not really feasible. But yeah, the strategy is definitely to grow, to be able to hire and support. But yeah, just trying to take it day by day alone in the office.
Yeah. No, it is. And you do have to take it day by day, especially those first few
Mhm.
months too. And there's so much that you can work on even those first few months, building your standards, figuring out what you're going to do and that.
Oh, yeah.
And like now you get to and that's also the hard thing is like now you're the one who decides that. And
Yeah.
sometimes
Yeah.
that's intimidating because you're like
Yeah.
some things I was like I don't want to have to pick everything out. I don't want to pick out the line weight colors. I don't know what software programs you use.
I'm focusing on CAD.
Okay,
Um,
same. So that was another thing. I was like, oh, I have to
mhm.
pick all the line weights. So I ended up buying a
Yeah.
template and I was like, okay. But then every decision, which sometimes can get a little overwhelming because sometimes I'll be like, I don't want to make this decision. Can somebody else
Yep.
make it? Because, or it's just a decision I could go either way on however
Yep.
this will look. And it's just like, it just looks the way it looks. And so there's a lot of that as well. And so, what are some of the obviously the freedom of time, it sounds like, but what are some of the other gains you have noticed in the last 8 months? Like, that have been just maybe that you weren't expecting that you're just like, wow, now I can do whatever this is.
Yeah, I think it's really been like you said, the independence, but also kind of this company is me. So it kind
Mm-hmm.
of falls on me and, trying to make the connections based off of, my personality or my resume or all these things. And so what's been really satisfying is getting projects when I have no portfolio under Portico
Mm-hmm.
and saying, I'm getting these projects because these people are trusting me based on a conversation we had, or they're trusting my resume, or they're trusting that I'm going to do a good job. So that's been really satisfying is, kind of the thoughts you always had about starting your own business and they start to work. I wanted to set things up a certain way and then it works. And you're like,
Yeah.
okay, yeah,
Yeah.
that's satisfying.
No, that's so true. And you brought up a really great point of not having a portfolio under Portica. And that's a huge thing too, is like your
Hmm.
people are trusting you. And that's
Yeah.
kind of a little bit of that scary. And there's jobs I definitely didn't get the first few months because clients were like, or potential
Yeah,
clients were like, well, can I see some of your work? And
exactly.
I had a conversation with my previous boss, like, hey, can I show some of the work I did at the firm, because that was a conversation we had. And but then at the end of the day, I was like, this isn't my work. I didn't pick any of these finishes, these colors, this design. Like I drafted
Mhm.
it, I did the site
Mhm.
visit. So there's a difference. So do you have any advice for someone who exactly doesn't have that portfolio on how can you get that client to trust you?
I mean, yeah, it's really hard. I think you have to probably do twice as much as you would normally
Mm-hmm.
do if you're working for a firm. So, almost like proving you can deliver with things that aren't necessarily project related yet. For example, being proactive in setting up the meetings, putting a schedule out there as quickly as you can, putting a timeline and putting a really thorough proposal and talking them through exactly what you're going to do in the proposal and what you can do for them to make you seem more valuable. And it's really hard to convince a client of that when they don't have, work and they haven't worked with you before to know, what they're going to get from you. So it's a challenge. And I would say it doesn't always work. They see brand new firm, less than a year old. Nah,
Yeah.
she's not capable. So, I mean, that's even more motivation just to grow and show them I can do it, right? But that exists out there for sure. And, you'll get passed off for, larger firms that can execute day one, right? That
Yeah,
have the
right.
teams ready to go, that have the history and the background and the portfolio to be able to do that. So, it's a lot of, yeah, you got to do 2 times the amount of work for sure.
That's great advice. I think that's really great advice. And it made me think of a few other questions about wondering, because I know also when like you brought up the fact that a bigger firm could start day one. And I
Mm-hmm.
think too, as like a brand new baby architecture company, within even the rate that we charge is sometimes similar to designers. So people who aren't licensed. And that's something I had to navigate where I was competing for work with designers. And I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, but I'm an architect. And clients don't understand, most clients don't
No, they
understand what the
don't.
difference is,
No,
unfortunately.
they don't. And that actually happened fairly recently where I was bidding on a project and, I'm up against designers and, they end up awarding it to the designer. And I was like, wait. but you need me. Like, you
Yeah.
can go to another architect, that's okay, but like, you need an architect to get this project done. And so it's a little bit of client education. So that's definitely still happening, especially with smaller owners. So that's a big part. And then there's also the trying to convince, okay, there's less overhead, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you don't have an entire team of people yet, or you don't have an office, or you don't have all these things, but you don't want to completely shortchange yourself from a fee perspective. And you almost have to act like you have the overhead, you as the
Mm-hmm.
same as an office, and you try to portray your value in the same way, rather than just getting hired because you're the cheap solo entrepreneur, right? That's a huge conversation. I just think industry wide in general, that architects tend to undervalue themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and clients don't quite understand what you're providing for this fee.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so you don't have to share with us what your fee is, but how did you come up with the fee? Because that's another
Yeah.
question I get too from so many people who want to start their own firm.
It's super calculated, actually. And I was fortunate. The firms that I worked at, because I was involved, there were budget templates that were set up. So you start to understand, okay, understanding hourly rates,
Mm-hmm.
understanding a profit margin, and understanding, what your costs as a business owner are going to be too. And all those things come together to then create something that's based on experience. So, for example, if I'm doing a project, let's just say CDs and CA, maybe
Mm-hmm.
there's a interior designer that gets passed off. I'm going to start to calculate, okay, how many hours does it take me to do a floor plan?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking at different hourly rates, even though it's just me. I'm seeing my hourly rate as AOR. I'm seeing my hourly rate as a drafter. I'm seeing my hourly rate as a project manager. And I start to divide those hours just like you would at a project in a firm where, okay, it might take me 8 hours for a floor plan. It might take me an hour for a cover sheet as a drafter. Okay, there's going to be maybe 6 coordination calls. Okay, that's my hourly rate as a PM. And then I'm looking at QAQC. Okay, that's going to be my hourly rate as an AOR. And I start to stack all those things together of how closely and as accurate as I can be, understanding how long it's going to take me to do the project. Then there's a profit margin. And then this part isn't super calculated. At the very end, you see the number and you kind of do a gut check. You say, okay, do I know the total cost of construction? Okay, maybe I don't.
Mm-hmm.
Or, even if I knew the total cost of construction and I took 6 to 8% of that,
Mm-hmm.
am I going to still look so inflated against, my competition? Or, can I bring that profit margin down because this is really good exposure? I take that number, calculate it off of what I think the project needs, and then I gut check it, which is not easy. I know that you can probably relate. Lots of the other business owners that I've met and talked to can relate to is sometimes you'll have a client that says, wow, this is insanely expensive. And then another client will sign the contract without even blinking, you know?
Yeah.
So it's so hard to gauge, like, am I too expensive? Am I too cheap?
Mm-hmm.
So I try to be as calculated as possible so I can defend myself.
Mm-hmm.
But then there is like a gut check moment.
Mm-hmm. Sent out a proposal this morning, and also like I compared it was in a same scope of work as a previous project I've
Yep.
kind of already worked on. So I was like, okay, I kind of already know where this is headed. But at the end of it, yeah, I just looked at the number and I'm like, okay, does this make sense? Because too, you don't want to look inflated, and then it's just like,
Mhm.
and I have had clients who have tried to like negotiate my hourly rate
Yeah.
with me. And I'm like, no, this is the set. There's no
Yeah.
negotiation. Like you're
Yeah.
getting me for this. I mean, I'll go up, but I won't go down.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
that's also something is advocating for yourself as well. And I think
Definitely.
because also as women, these are both male clients, and the one client or potential client, he's not a client, he wanted my fee to go in half. So it was for an accessory dwelling unit, like an ADU, so a secondary unit on the property. And so I calculated the hours because my contract is an hourly, not to exceed without prior written
Mhm.
approval. So I looked at it and I was like, if you cut this in half, let me just look at where the hours are. And I'm like, there is no way, because he even kind of was like, well, there's actually another, designer who could do it for half your price. And I was like, well, gosh, I actually kind of want to see that proposal. I didn't. I was like, no,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
trust my numbers. But I'm like, I just did not see how you could put together a project for half the cost without just being really mediocre too. And I want that quality as well. So That was a little experience that kind of taught me, like, no, I'm going to stand by my number.
Oh, it's so hard. That exact same thing happened to me, within some of my very first proposals that I was issuing is, I put a proposal together. I was carrying a kitchen consultant, so I had a sub-consultant in that proposal,
Oh, nice.
and I issue the proposal. Everything's great. I hadn't heard back from the client. I offered, hey, let's walk through it. I can tell you what each line item is. And he calls me back and he says, well, I sent your numbers over to another architect, which one,
Mhm.
no, you can't do that. This was supposed to
Yeah.
be confidential, but that's okay.
Yeah.
And do you know so and so? And I was like, well, I do know them, and they're really great. And the last thing I would want is for this client to pit me and that other architect up against each other. And basically came down to, look, if they're going to give you something that's significantly cheaper than you're getting with me, I can't cut my fee. I can't
Mhm.
propose what they're proposing to you. I won't make any money. I'll
Mhm.
lose money on this. So go ahead, go with them. Like, I know that they're great.
Yeah.
And just by having that conversation, then I learned that, well, he actually hadn't instructed that architect to include food service. So
Mm.
we were actually almost like spot on, almost identical
Wow.
in fees. And then I ended up getting the project, and it was so crazy how it was, we're always trying to educate the clients on like how we want to change the industry a little bit and not be
Mhm.
so cutthroat with each other. And I've been saying a lot recently. I was in school during the first recession, and now where we're kind of at in the industry now is, look, there's enough work to go around. And when there's not enough
Yes.
work to go around, we're all going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
Uh, just like we were before, we're all going to be in trouble
Mhm.
if there's not enough work to go around. So it's kind of choosing, picking and choosing which projects and clients I want to work with based on that, based on them trying to pit us against each other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Kelsey, thank you so much for taking the time to come on From the Honeycomb podcast and sharing your story, your entrepreneurship story, your architectural story, and even the lessons you've already learned. I feel like you're going to learn so many, like without trying it and doing it, like that's not how you're going to grow. And I can
Mhm.
already see you're doing well, you're growing, you built that foundation the right way, you talk to the right professionals as a professional should do, is check in with other professionals that you
Mhm.
stayed in your lane, you understood the lawyer and the accountant business part, the branding, everything. So I'm really rooting for you because I
Thank you.
think, yeah, of course. I think you are on the right path and you've done it so right up until this point that I think you're going to be really successful.
No, I really appreciate it. And, I love to connect with people exactly in your position to kind of hear, what you've been through after a year in business. And I learn something new every single day. So really excited. Thanks again.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. And where can listeners find you?
The easiest way to find me is Portico Arch, ARCH is my Instagram handle. You can DM me. I'm also on LinkedIn with my name, but also Portico Architecture has its own LinkedIn page. So all of those are really great ways to connect with me, and it'll find its way to my email.
Perfect. Well, Kelsey, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of From the Honeycomb podcast. If you enjoyed it, please take a moment to rate, review, and share it with your friends. To stay connected, follow me on Instagram at From the Honeycomb podcast, and you can support the podcast through the Patreon link in the show notes. And don't forget to subscribe to my monthly newsletter where I share exclusive behind-the-scene content and tips on running a mindful and successful architecture business. Thank you again for listening, and stay curious.